Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Think Digital Sustainability for Government. We are now running through with some panel discussions and a presentation through until 4:20. So our first post-lunch panel discussion to get you out of the post-lunch slump, and I promise that it will, is Beyond Carbon, the wider scope of digital sustainability. So reducing carbon emissions is often the focus of conversations around digital sustainability, but the impact digital technology has on the environment encompasses so much more, as we've heard already today. That includes resource extraction, so the production of digital devices requires extensive mining for metals and minerals. Water usage, whether that's through manufacturing electronic components or cooling data centres. And e-waste and the circular economy. Improper disposal can release toxic substances into the environment, and recycling rates remain low, which exacerbates the issue of resource depletion. So, addressing a wider range of impacts is essential for driving a more sustainable future. We've got three brilliant speakers to guide you through all of that and more. We'll be starting with Steve Chinnery, product strategist at DWP Digital, who you've already heard once already today. Then we'll hear from Ned Gartside, who's recently joined the digital sustainability team at DEFRA as Sustainable Design Lead. And then Emma Albury, Senior Digital Sustainability Manager at the Government Digital Service. Again, we'll get some opening remarks from the panel. We'll have a bit of a conversation, and then we'll come out to you, the audience. We'll be bringing this one to a close at about 3:20. So please get your questions ready and do feel free to use the Slido. I'm going to hand over to Steve first. In fact, Steve is going to talk us through a slide.
Yeah, we put the slide up. Hi, it's me again. Apologies, I'm like a bad smell. So we thought it'd be useful to anchor this session from... So I guess the first question is, who's familiar with this? Do I need to sit down? Or so some are, some aren't. So this is a model that has been produced by the Stockholm Institute, and I would absolutely recommend having a look at that if you're not familiar with it. When you get home. And the idea behind it is they've identified these 9 boundaries that they believe if we go beyond those boundaries, it will massively impact human race's ability to thrive into the future. And you can see that there are some things you're probably quite familiar with, climate change, for example, but there's a lot of other things on here as well. In terms of biosphere integrity, land system change, ocean acidification, fresh water, etc., etc. And you can probably also see that it's not a good news story at the moment. We've blasted through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those as at 2023. And I believe the 24 model looked like ocean acidification was not a good place either. What we're going to do, I think, in a discussion that we're going to have today is to talk about some things around that model. One thing that it's really important to state is that these are not, although the model looks like these things are siloed, in reality they aren't. They kind of all interact with one another. So, for example, if you're building data centers, you're getting some land system change, you're probably looking at fresh water, you're probably looking at CO2 concentration, ocean acidification, etc., etc. You get the idea. Okay, make sense? I'm going to hand over to Ned.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That's brilliant intro to the planetary boundaries. Yeah, so I was going to start off by talking about focusing on the costs, the environmental costs, really, in particular coming from the extraction of resources that are needed for the kind of manufacture of digital technologies. So what are those materials, first of all? Well, just as a quick summary, those that we need to manufacture digital hardware are things like copper, cobalt, lithium, graphite, and then the so-called rare earth metals, which are a group of 17, or some say 15, I don't really understand what the argument is there, but metallic elements that are called rare, but that's not because they are actually rare in terms of how much of them or their kind of geographic distribution across the earth, but they're rare in terms of how often they appear in pure form in the ground, and how expensive they are to extract. And maybe the first challenge here worth mentioning is that these materials that we need for digital technologies are overwhelmingly the same materials that are described as critical for the transition to low carbon technologies, to kind of renewable energy. So according to the UN Trade and Development Organization, they label 52 minerals as critical for low carbon tech And 51 of those 52 are also critical for digital technology, with potassium being the only exception. And yeah, we're seeing increasing demand from digital and from low carbon, and what's required for a low carbon transition, leading to what some describe as exponential extraction. According to the International Energy Agency, we'll need about 10 times the volume of these transition minerals in 2050 compared to 2022. And so, yeah, the first major issue here is perhaps danger of depletion, as according to the US Geological Survey, 23 of these minerals may have very limited availability in 2050. And yeah, part of that is not actually absolute like depletion of these minerals, but really just the fact that these materials are becoming more and more expensive to extract from the Earth's crust. And the second issue I wanted to point to is one where planetary boundaries become really, really relevant. And that's where the mining and processing of these minerals is happening, because that's often occurring in regions and amongst our most vital ecosystems and actually driving land system change. And so again, according to the UN, 44% of all operational mines globally are in forests, and major forest mining countries include Brazil, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, and Zambia. And in Congo, for example, mining for copper and cobalt is a major driver of deforestation. And it's not just the mines themselves. We're talking about infrastructure for water supply, for electricity, roads, ports, trains, houses for everyone to live in, and farmland as well, a lot of farmland to grow the food. So this is all leading to a deforestation, destruction of the rainforest. And yeah, so I guess it's a question for us to consider really, is will this trend of deforestation in particular, if we're considering land system change, continue? We don't know, but Congo has about half the world's cobalt reserves. Indonesia has about 42% of nickel reserves. And Brazil has large reserves of a number of key transition minerals and rare earths. So there's a real danger that in our drive to get at these minerals, we're going to accelerate deforestation, which was going to have the effect also of reducing the capacity of these forests to absorb carbon, act as carbon sinks, and so contributes to climate change. And then, so thirdly, I think there's also what some would describe as a colonial aspect to this, really, in the sense that many of these environmental and social costs associated with material extraction and processing now are being borne by the global south, even while the benefits are accruing to the global north. And one example, I think a really good one, is this place, Bayan Obo, which is a mining district in Inner Mongolia in China, which is often termed the world center of rare earth minerals. And it's where about 80% of China's rare earth reserves are located. And this whole region sees widespread contamination of soil with heavy metals, with fluorine, with arsenic. And a lot of that actually ends up in the Yellow River, which is a water source for millions of people. I think the human cost there is really brought home by what they call these cancer villages in that region. And in the worst of these cancer villages, they've got cancer rates that are 70 times the normal rate, which is pretty scary. And actually, yeah, I think I might stop there because I've got far too many other things I could be saying on my prompt cards.
I love your brain. Your brain just spread out there. It's fantastic. I'll just elaborate on what you were talking about then, and also what Matty touched upon in the last talk, which is the social sustainability pillar. So everything comes at a cost unless it's replenished. This is the circular nature of all living systems, us as human beings being one of those systems. Tech, in general, is consumptive and therefore depletive. So then we need to look at, well, then what is the cost and who is it costing? Now, the globalization of supply chains has been really helpful in providing us with all the goods and services that we desire, but there's a real detachment from the knowledge of the origins. And this is something that we really need to consider more and be more accountable for, mainly because our consumption choices here are greatly affecting those, for the most part, in the global south. Yes, they have effects on us here. We see sort of how the climate crisis is affecting us here in the UK and even across Europe and whatnot. The greatest impacts are occurring in the global south because of our consumption, in part, right? In large part. So the growth of artificial intelligence and data centers and consumer devices and renewable energies, this brings opportunities which are really exciting. But with those opportunities, it bears responsibility. We need to bear responsibility along with those innovations. And then resource extraction of these rare metals, it does fuel modern slavery and human trafficking, arms conflict, and it leads to the depletion of environmental conditions and resources. We do see more climate disasters in these countries, and this is lowering the standards of living in those countries. It's also causing mass migration, which does impact us as well. And we also see these impacts that the people in these communities in the Global South are experiencing. They do have a catalyst effect, on our weather conditions and even socioeconomic kind of issues that we experience here as well. The climate crisis, it doesn't respect boundaries and borders. Like it does have that butterfly effect. The delocalized pollution generated by e-waste and the manufacturing of tech components, including those used for renewable energy, it takes a really heavy toll on the health and the well-being and the social lives of the people in these communities in the Global South. Yeah, talking about renewable energy, it's not the ultimate solution in the fact that, by breaking free of fossil fuels, that means we are more reliant upon these rare earth minerals that it has been talking about, as well as it generating more e-waste and also legacy technology being retired. That ends up in e-waste as well. What can we do about this? What actions can we take? I'd like to use OneLogin, my team, as a sort of example for some of the things that we're looking at to take accountability in our positioning in this. So you did hear Natalie Jones speak earlier about some of the things OneLogin's doing, and the wonderful Jennifer Marks, who I spy at the back. She'll be talking later more in depth, but just from a superficial level, raising awareness around these issues is really, really important. So talking about these issues here in public, but also internally within your teams and with all the different stakeholders. Training is really important. We have held the Sustainability 101 training sessions that Natalie was talking about, and we're hoping to expand that to cover the different professions. Talking to vendors and suppliers, have those difficult conversations. It's all a bit squirmy, I know that, but we do have a responsibility here. So ask them, what is your slave labor policies? Where are you resourcing your water for your data centers? Are you supplementing that back into the local communities? Are you using renewable energies? Are you really using them, or are you just offsetting? The kind of sticky questions that I think we all kind of need to ask. And then something that we are doing, aligning with that. So there's this cross-government group that was spoken about earlier. Within that, we're in our procurement, within our bids for contracts, we are working towards suppliers reporting their emissions. And, we will be holding them accountable to that. Also, with your purchasing choices. So ask your suppliers as well. Do they have digital product passports? Can they really trace the supply chain? Are they refurbishing and recycling the rare earth minerals that they are putting into their consumer products? And one thing that we're doing in regards to that is working with this excellent company called N2, and they have this technology called bioleaching. It's a bacteria that eats away everything except for the rare earth metals, which you can then repurpose. And so we're doing an initiative with them. But the main thing is reducing consumption. This is what we need to do. We're doing it through dashboards, through monitoring, but then also optimizing our systems is really important, and getting rid of, a lot of waste that we have in regards to logs and, emails, what Mark was talking about before with being rude. So in general, we need to look at the social and human rights implications within our consumer choices. And the main actions that we can take is to reduce consumption and to make responsible choices around our supply chains. And that does not mean just shutting down those industries, because in the Global South, a lot of these communities rely on these industries for their livelihoods. So it's about doing it responsibly, and that requires collaboration with our vendors and suppliers.
Thank you all. That was cheery, but I think also practical, and we'll come more to mitigations and what else we can do to try and stop some of those harms in a second. I wonder if we could have the planetary boundaries diagram back on the screen quickly, because one of the questions we've had from Slido is what is meant by novel entities on that chart?
Yeah, I can answer that. So this is microplastics, things like that. So it's the kind of plastics decomposing, ending up in the ocean and increasingly ending up in the food chain. So whether that's through fish or whether that's through kind of other animal-based kind of food.
Great, thank you. So we've sort of talked quite a bit about mining and land use and extraction. We started talking about e-waste as well, and I think we might have got another diagram which shows us the waste hierarchy. There we are. I don't know if anyone wants to talk us through.
Well, can I just start then? So how many of us have got one of these? Yeah? So weighs about 2 kilograms. How much, according to the UN, what volume of resources does it take to make this? Anyone want to shout out a guess? Be brave. 500 kilograms at the back. Any advance on 500?
I heard an 800. I think I heard a 200 as well.
So the answer is whoever said 800, you've obviously read the same report as me. And I would absolutely suggest reading the UN Digital Economy report. So it's 800 kilograms worth of resources goes into making this. So to put that in context, spring is coming. You're probably going to be going down the garden centre, getting those big bags of compost, 40-litre ones. 32 of those bags worth of weight of resources is what goes into here. And yet, kind of, we are in a mindset of, after having one of these for 2 or 3 years, what do we do with it? Yeah, absolutely in the background. Yeah. There's a tendency for us to throw it away. Yeah. Part of the thing that I'm really passionate about is getting us away from a kind of concept of these things being very abundant to these things are actually a valuable resource. I'm very keen on the kind of concept of, anyone heard of dynamic obsolescence? Yeah, where you kind of look at these bits of kit and then you make a decision on how hard a life that they've had and then and what we're using it for in terms of when we get rid of it. So I look at this in terms of a bit like trainers. If you're built like me, as you can see, massively fit athlete, goes running all the time. I don't. My trainers don't get used very much. Yeah, so I could probably keep my trainers for a very long period of time. If you're like Oliver or Ned and kind of go running and kind of doing triathlons, etc., you might need to be changing your trainers a bit more often, maybe repair them a bit more often. But at the moment, the tendency is that we get through to 2 years or so, time to change. Yeah. So big thing for me is what do we need to look at in terms of how this equipment gets used moving forward? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Building on that, we've actually got a question on Slido, which is, why is the public sector not buying refurbished or devices or recycling at scale and still pushing the problem onto IT recyclers who don't do some of that refurbishment or don't do things in the right way?
So we recently, I can't remember when it was, but we actually, prior to me joining as a civil servant, sadly, got rid of a heap of our hardware. And we've now looking at a contract, like I said, with N2S instead, who we feel, so even though the contract with the recycling organisation that we're dealing with at the moment seem on paper fine, we do want to take it a step further and really extract, like what you were just talking about, sort of every single element in it can be, extracted and reused or repurposed in some kind of way. And we personally think, N2S is doing a better job at that. I personally, in case you hadn't noticed, get really excited about these innovative systems like bioleaching. Just so cool. Bit creepy, but cool. And obviously, we as the government, we don't have the facilities to be doing that ourselves. So we do have to have that done via contract by third parties. But it's just about also reading between the lines. So a lot of these providers, they will say that they recycle and they refurbish and they repurpose. Look at the percentages. Do look at the percentages because often it's a lot smaller than the hype. But saying that, there is, plenty of third parties who are being more responsible around that.
I just want to come in on that.
No.
We do have a question, which is there's been a lot of mention about the global south and exactly what that means. I think broadly speaking, it does tend to mean sort of lower and middle income countries in Africa, South America. It doesn't include, for instance, Australia or New Zealand. And it seems to be the term which is being used more and more to sort of differentiate between especially G7 nations and a lot of the rest. I think that's probably fair as a clarification.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I don't like the concept of like, third world or developing nations, because that's quite ignorant to the different developments of those countries. For example, Egypt is considered, the global south, and yet it's kind of the mother of civilization. And you also have these indigenous cultures around the world who are very well equipped at living harmoniously in balance with nature, far more than we are. And I personally think that's really developed. So it's more, what do you define as being developed or not? So for me, I prefer to use the term global south, but it kind of encompasses the countries that would traditionally say third world or, developing.
Thanks. I've also just got someone saying DEFRA is buying refurbished technology. It was a requirement of our new hardware contracts. Yeah. That's very good to know. Before we come out to all of you for more questions, we've talked about mining and land use and extraction. We've talked about e-waste. I think is something that a few of you also wanted to touch on.
Yep. So every time you do an AI prompt, on average, uses one of these bottle form of water to generate a single AI prompt. So I World Economic Forum reckon that by, I think it's 2027, that equates to AI using 1.7 trillion gallons of water. So if you want to put that in context, that's 82 million swimming pools. And it's not bad water. Yeah, it's not kind of water that you can pull out of the ocean, etc., because they want to keep their nice kind of data centers nice and pure and not get clogged up in the cooling systems. It's the kind of water that we need for kind of drinking water, etc. So this is a problem. Now, that's an average. It's not all sheep dipping data centers all the same. Is also the wrong answer as well. There are some data centers that use closed loop cooling, which uses much less water, but firstly, trade-off alert, uses much more electricity. So a big part of kind of not all data centers are created equal. So one of the points I would definitely make is sheep dipping data centers as being all the same is absolutely the wrong thing to do. So there's a world of difference between a data center, for example, in the northeast of England, which is run off of recycling energy, renewable energy, and in a colder climate with a closed loop water system, that's going to be kind of much better for the environment than a massive mega data center in the middle of an area that's using high carbon electricity and is using water, kind of drawing it out from an area which is very kind of water poor. And you've seen across the world, there's been news stories, I'm sure you've seen some of them, of communities kind of fighting back about this in terms of, no, we do not want to have your big data center near us because it's going to take all of the water that we're wanting to use for our community. So it's a big issue and it's not going away.
Yeah, that one of the cases was in Santiago in Chile, and the local community pushed back on having a data center built there because it was in a drought-ridden area. They won the case, thankfully, and that did actually prompt Google to develop a more circular cooling system off the back of it. So it's always worth pushing back. And I do think, that's one of the discussions I was having with they were building within their data centers as well. And I think we all have a responsibility to ask our vendors, our suppliers, these questions, because if we don't put the pressure upon them, they're probably not likely to change. It is all about the buck. And if they're going to have to make adaptations to be more sustainable, they're probably not going to do it unless they recognize that their clients are demanding it. And this is why we do have a responsibility to put pressure on them. It might be out of our hands to some degree, sort of how the data centers are being run and built and where. But, we are their customers. So we actually do have quite a lot of power in influencing their decision making. So use it.
Yeah. And on water stress, I think it's interesting because often news stories have focused a lot on the southwest of the United States, for example, or on Chile and Santiago. But then we've also seen stuff recently in the news about the southeast of England, which, according to the Environment Agency, is the area of the UK which is most at risk of running out of water. And actually, as things stand, even without additional houses or data centers or anything, there's expected to be a shortfall of water by 2050. So yeah, it is interesting that it's something that has to be considered, right here on our doorstep. And like as you were pointed to, Steve, like whether if even within the UK there are quite big regional differences in terms of availability of water, and also the greenness of the electricity grid in different regions of the country have quite big implications for the footprint of data centers. I guess that's something we all need to kind of bear in mind when we talk about this.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got some great questions on Slido, but I've taken a few from there already. Does anybody want to ask a question out loud? We've got the microphone ready to come to you now. Hands up if you'd like to ask a question. We've got one right at the back. Let's take both. So we'll take one right at the back, and then we'll take one from the gentleman in the excellent shirt further to the front.
Thanks. So the challenge with this is there's so many different dimensions to this, isn't there? Does anyone on the panel have advice on how to help stakeholders sort of navigate this complexity? Some of the clients I've worked with have said, can you just give me one number? And I'm like, no. So there's clearly not one sort of magical answer, but helping sort of organizations and stakeholders navigate the complexity of planetary boundaries and the different concerns is something that I appreciate some thoughts on.
Thanks. And if we take the other question, Dan, here at the front as well.
Thank you. So clearly we need to look at getting less new stuff to manage down the range of embodied impacts. I'm just wondering if the panel have had any success engaging their digital teams around the sufficiency agenda with all the hype that we get around the new tech.
Yeah, thanks for that last one, Ben. Appreciate that question. In terms of Oliver's question, I'm going to subtly go back one. Yes, so there are some tools out there that can help with that. And I kind of want to thank Ishmael Badu, who's at the back, my boss. And I'm not just saying that because he's my boss. But we've looked at a tool by a Swiss company called Resilio that actually enables you to do a life cycle assessment across your kind of service journeys, and it includes lots of elements of the planetary boundary stuff. So you can plug in the information, and it will give you information not just about the electricity that you're using, but some of the other elements of planetary boundaries as well. So it comes with a health warning, not about the technology, which is very good, but around, if you're not careful, you can go down a massive rabbit hole with it and get into measurement paralysis. But there are tools out there that can help with that. I think the best advice I would give is to not try and do everything all at once straight away. There's a film title in there somewhere, but maybe pick a few things, have a go at it, get that together, and then iterate over a period of time.
There's also the Planetary Boundaries course, the workshops that I think we've all done.
Mm.
Yeah, so check out that website. I think, are they free?
Now you're asking.
Jamal would know. Are the Planetary Boundary workshops free? Yeah, I mean, for us. Oh, yeah, the frescoes. So, yeah, check them out because, they're wonderful. And that's something that you can bring to your organizations as well to just inform them on, climate crisis in general, get a bit more gritty into sort of the holistic nature of the issue rather than it just being, about the temperature getting a bit warmer.
Yeah, I mean, I think I come back to the thing that with the planetary boundaries, which is that even if we only care about carbon, as like Johan Rockström keeps talking about, he's kind of led the Stockholm Institute in 2009 when they originated this planetary boundaries framework. But one of the key messages he keeps pushing now is that even if we only care about carbon, if we only care about greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, then we cannot only think about what we, as through human activities, are putting into the atmosphere directly. We have to consider, the land systems change. So we have to consider the health and the extent of the remaining sort of natural ecosystems that we have on Earth, the forests and the state of the oceans. So you can kind of come at it just through that carbon metric, if you like. Greenhouse gas is carbon equivalent. And so you don't have to say, you don't have to start by saying, look at all these 9, they're really important. We need to think about all these individually. We need to think about all of the knock-on effects and all of the feedback loops. You can still kind of start with that carbon metric and say, yes, we do need to think about like direct sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Then you can kind of bring in these other factors, I think, and say, unfortunately, we can't consider it alone, because as Johan Rockström puts it, sorry, I'm a bit obsessed with Johan Rockström's. I got a whole bunch of quotes from him here, but he says there is no Paris Agreement, there is no 1.5 degrees C, there is no 2 degrees C without keeping what we've got left of like rainforests and boreal forests and tundra in a reasonable condition, and an ocean ecosystem which is functioning to at least a reasonable degree and is not overly acidified.
Probably worth, after this doom and gloom for 35 minutes, I'm sure everyone's after lunch is going to go, woohoo. Could we just put the planetary boundaries slide back on? It's probably just worth making the point that there is one of those boundaries up there, which if you go back to the 80s, we were massively over, and that's the aerosol one. Sorry, the ozone one. Everyone remember the kind of ozone hole in the 80s? You're right. That explains a lot.
Right.
Yeah, that one was probably the first of these that we went right through the planetary boundary, and through legislation and through coordinated action. I think it was the Montreal Agreement. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. We managed to kind of outlaw some of these CFCs that caused that to happen, and we actually managed to row back to a position where you can see there, at least at the moment, we're back. All of this stuff, and it was stuff I think that Oliver talked about earlier on, is that we can do this stuff, but we've got to commit to doing it. This isn't a case of it's really difficult. It is really difficult, but we've shown again and again that it's possible to kind of step back from this if we show a committed plan of action to actually making it happen.
I'm going to give you one final opportunity to be optimistic as well. And so one final remark from each of you, and please do keep it short. Anonymous has asked, beyond devices, what are some practical things we can do to reduce the planetary impacts of our tech, for example, software? So one practical thing that people can take away with them today.
Well, definitely, as I said, reduce consumption and invest in responsible supply chains. But I'd like to say something else that's a bit optimistic. We've been talking about sort of how intertwined all of these issues are, including the social ones that I spoke about. And that can seem really overwhelming because there's so much to cover. But at the same time, on the flip side, it's actually really beautiful to think that you can make a difference in something that feels quite siloed and isolated, when really it's not. It is actually the actions that we take do really positively affect people halfway across the other side of the world in all different kinds of ways and scenarios. So I find that really inspiring rather than, sort of disheartening. And keep that in mind, just the butterfly effect, every little thing you do can and does have a knock-on effect, and it is of worth. I think sometimes within our sector, it can get really disheartening and it feels like just a grain of sand, in the ocean. But it does all add up and it does have these ripple effects. So please keep doing all the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, that was beautiful. How do I follow that? Yeah, talk about it. We can talk about it. We can all be talking about it, right? We can raise awareness. We can, like you say, we can do those courses that are either free or maybe costs a few quid.
Charge it to your company.
Yeah. And yeah, I think, so I think, spreading awareness and having this conversation with everyone we can, with those we work with, even, friends, family, is a kind of important part of this, really. So, but do it in the way that you described. not the way that I have done today. No doom and gloom.
I used the question, I kind of, in the previous chat, I kind of used the curious statement. And I think a lot of this is about being curious. So if your laptop is working really well and you get that email that says it's time for you to change your laptop, be curious and try and ask the question, why? I think part of asking good questions on some of this stuff and showing a bit of curiosity I don't think there's any substitute for it. So kind of ask good questions and subscribe to Mark on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Steve, Emma, Ned, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.